to his PA, and she says he's logging in.
So maybe as we wait for him, I can call the meeting to order.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Welcome everyone. It's very exciting to see you joining from across the world on this very important webinar on empowering Africa digital diplomacy. In the last few years, we've seen the space of both diplomacy and technology changing very rapidly. And recently, the DiploFoundation released a report on African voices, which basically said that Africa's participation in this space is lower than expected. So we felt it was important to meet with you all and with some very distinguished supporters and panelists in order to discuss this important issue and make sure that Africa's voice is heard on the international stage. So with me, I have Ambassador Valentin, who is the Swiss ambassador to Kenya, who is His Excellency is about to make some remarks to welcome us. We also have Jovan Kubalia, who heads the DiploFoundation, which is a very strong voice in diplomacy education, especially in the area of digital diplomacy. I've seen Dr. Bitange Demo has also joined us, one of our distinguished panelists. Welcome, Your Excellency. We have with us also Yvonne Kivuti, who is a career diplomat working in the Kenya Mission in Geneva. And we are expecting any moment Engineer John Tanui, distinguished Principal Secretary of the Ministry of ICT here in Kenya. And you'll shortly be hearing from all of them. I welcome all of you to this meeting. And as we wait for the PS, maybe Professor Kubalia, you can make a few remarks.
Thank you very much, Kate. It's my great honor and pleasure to be today here. As I can see, there are quite a few colleagues from our alumni, now distinguished and accomplished people in the different fields, in particular in Africa. And this is Diplo, as you know. Diplo's priority is capacity building, especially in the African continent. And I'm very proud that there is no single country in Africa without diplomats or telecom specialists who didn't go through the Diplo's capacity building, especially in early days, 15 or 20 years ago. And it also informed our study and our project and activities in this field. And they're guided by few sort of elements. And the first element is that without meaningful participation of African countries in global digital policy, we cannot have inclusive and effective multilateral digital governance. And it's not just the question of strengthening African voices, which is obviously the focus of this workshop, but it is also making inclusive, balanced, and sustainable global digital governance. We always highlight it in discussion with the colleagues from the developed countries that it is a real partnership, not necessarily just development assistance, because there is a mutual interest in cybersecurity and data in AI fields. That's the first point. Second point is it's true that African voices are missing in the global digital governance. And we identified few reasons. One reason is that this field is developing so fast that it is difficult to follow. Whether it is data, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, digital identity. And we know that, for example, missions here in Geneva, even big missions, let alone small and developing countries, have difficulties to follow it. Therefore, there is a need for individual and institutional capacity building. In this context, there is also need for African diplomacy and African governments to make clear priorities when they cover digital. They cannot cover all issues, and they should definitely, what our study shown is that access is one of the issues, question of cybercrime, question of e-commerce. Those are few issue areas that have been coming constantly into discussion in our study, which we conducted on the participation on African countries in digital diplomacy. It will be shared in chat, the link to that. Now, while African countries have to find the real priorities, they have also to have idea what's going on generally. I'll give you an example of artificial intelligence. Today, wherever you go, whatever media you follow, you have something on artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. Therefore, there is a need for all actors, including African countries, to have understanding in what directions things are moving. Maybe even if they don't have a capacity in the field of artificial intelligence to prepare for this coming tide and to avoid a typical situation that every new technology increases digital divides. That's a huge risk, and that has to be addressed. And I'm very proud that through the report, through the work and capacity buildings like we have last week in New York, with Kate Gaetao and colleagues from other countries for the permanent missions in New York, training that we do in Geneva, digital watch resources, we are trying to contribute to avoid that widening of digital gap by focusing in particular on the representation of African countries in digital governance. Official one through diplomatic services, but also multi-stakeholder one by very vibrant academia, technical community, civil society in many African countries. Kate, that would be sort of framing of, at least from our perspective, discussion. Need for louder digital voices. Gap exists. We have to act, if I can say, yesterday. And there are few areas which I outlined, mainly on institutional and individual capacity building that we have to focus on. Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jovan, for that wonderful introduction. And I would also like to welcome our distinguished Principal Secretary, Engineer Tanui, who has joined us, and we're looking forward to hearing from him during the panel. As we prepare to go into the panel, I'm so excited to welcome all of you. I can see that we now have close to 100 participants in this meeting, which shows how important this subject is to Africans from all over the continent. So Ambassador Valentin, could you tell us a little bit about the Swiss government's support for this important topic?
Well, Kate, thank you very much. Colleagues, PS, Ambassador, Mwende, Jovan, I see so many familiar faces. Welcome to this webinar. I'm really thrilled and thank Diplo for putting it up. I think this kind of exchange really is very important. We have just heard Jovan giving an outline of this important report about the louder voices in Africa. And I thought it could be interesting perhaps for you to hear what exactly does all of that mean for example, the Swiss embassy here in Nairobi. What do we do in what we call this digital diplomacy? And you may know that Switzerland has drafted, the Swiss government has drafted a digital foreign policy about 2 years ago, which formulates certain priorities. One is digital governance, the governance of the digital space. The second one is prosperity and sustainable development. We have cybersecurity, and then we have something which we call digital self-determination, which goes beyond the mere protection of data. And I think the Swiss embassy here in Nairobi is an interesting case in point because Nairobi has been hailed, the Silicon Savannah, Nairobi has been hailed, for example, by another Geneva actor, the World Economic Forum, as one of the 5 global digital or tech hubs to watch in the coming years. So there is an extremely vibrant tech environment here in Nairobi, which some of you know much better than I do. But it is certainly an interesting case for the Swiss embassy to see how we can implement this Swiss digital foreign policy. And I would just like to give you a few examples of what we are doing. We recently had the visit of the tech envoy, who we also visited P.S. Tanui, and thank you again for your time. It was a first contact of him, for him, also to give him an idea about the vibrancy and the energy of the digital environment and the digital ecosystem here in Nairobi. We had contacts not only with the government, but also with tech industry and civil society. And we are now following up to see where we can develop certain cooperations. In one strand of cooperations in the future will certainly be also in the context of International Geneva, because that is one of the missions that we gave ourselves, is also to strengthen the ties between Nairobi and International Geneva and the tech actors, foremost among them, DiploFoundation and its training activities, which hopefully will also start here in Kenya. Then we have a very concrete cooperation with the tech sector, also in the context of our development cooperation. Now, I just give you one example. We are active in the arid lands of northern Kenya, where the main issue is water. So we are now working on the new approach to securing boreholes, and we do this with tech firms or tech companies. One of them is IBM, which puts sensors in the boreholes to make sure that the boreholes are operational 24 hours a day. And if there is a problem, it can be relayed to a command center, which is one of them is in Isiolo, in one of the important cities in the north of Kenya. Then they can immediately find ways. And this has secured access to water for pastoralist communities over the past 2 years and really has improved it. And it's only possible because of this specific tech solution. But then we also work more on the academic level. We had a project with Strathmore University here in Nairobi on digital self-determination. Strathmore made a very interesting study on the protection of data and the sovereignty on data in the context of fintech, a big topic here in Kenya with M-Pesa. And this will now be fed into a wider discussion we have with universities such as Harvard, Singapore, and Munich, the Technical University in Munich, to come up with showcases that will help the Swiss Foreign Ministry to develop this concept of digital self-determination. But for me, as an ambassador here, of course, it's extremely important to have also the perspective of Nairobi, of Kenya in this discussion, and Strathmore will continue to be involved in it. Another one is the Stronger Voices, the report that Jovan has mentioned. Jovan and I had regular contacts to try to see how to frame this report, and I then followed up within the ministry to make sure that we could really cooperate with Diplo to write this report, because we thought this will be the basis for our activities in Africa. And I'm really looking forward to implementing the recommendations of this report, and I see this webinar as one of the steps. Work with Diplo, and I mentioned it, our aim to strengthen ties between Kenya, Africa, and International Geneva. Work with Diplo is another of the activities. We had a meeting of alumni with Jovan. I'm looking forward to continuing that. And I'm glad also to see now that we have this new, so to speak, vehicle for our exchanges with this webinar. So if we can strengthen Diplo's presence here in Africa, I think that would really bring us a step further. And I'm
Sorry, Ambassador, you're frozen. Okay, can we check if there's an issue with the Ambassador Zellweger's connection? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, Kate, turn on your video.
We can hear you.
Yes, I'm just trying to reduce the stresses on my machine. Okay, we seem to have lost Ambassador Zellweger, unfortunately. As the technical team reconnects with him, I've noticed that Ambassador Al-Jawali from the African Union is with us. Maybe, Ambassador, you just like to greet us for a minute as before we reconnect with the Swiss ambassador, if we can, and go on to our panel.
I'm back in.
Oh, you're back. Oh, please continue.
Sorry. No, if the AU ambassador wishes to say a word, please. I will just finish I was almost finished when we were interrupted.
Please carry on, Ambassador.
You want me? Just
Yes,
to finish this point, we are about to conclude a bilateral MOU with Kenya, which would put one of its focus on the cooperation in the tech sector and research also in the tech sector. And that will give us then the legal framework to really have so to speak, institutionalized cooperation with the Kenyan government, but that would of course also include Kenyan academic institutions, universities, and the civil sector, and therefore would really give us a broad basis for strengthening our cooperation. But just all of this to indicate, and perhaps summing up, is that to have a digital strategy for our foreign policy has really helped us. In the 2 years that we had it, I think we have made some progress. More is to be made, and I'm really also heartened that in the discussion with the PS, Tanwi, we had, I think we identified some strands or some directions that we can follow up, and I really look forward to intensifying that cooperation. I wish you all the best for this webinar and look forward to the discussions. Thank you. Back to you, Kate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. A lot to chew on there. Digital foreign policy, tech envoys, digital self-determination. These are all terminologies which can be part of this webinar as we examine this important subject. Ambassador Al-Jawali, do you have a minute to just say hello?
Thank you very much, able the moderator, dear Dr. Kate Getao, and I'd like to once again commend the DiploFoundation and of course the Swiss embassies around the world, because I know that there was also a similar activity held in Addis Ababa under the custodianship, if we can call it so, of the Swiss embassy in Addis. I'm now happy to also meet His Excellency Ambassador Valentin Zellweger from the Nairobi perspective as well. I do, and I think proudly so, on work for the African Union Commission, but I promised our colleagues Diplo to participate in more of a personal capacity, being a Diplo faculty, and also having been a participant in a number of ICT-related forums, starting with the World Summit on Information Society, its preparatory work, and therefrom. I leave my colleagues from the African Union Commission, if they are there, to more comprehensively present what the African Union Commission is doing in that regard. But I wanted to highlight two particular initiatives that are taking place this year, 2023. One is that the African Union Peace and Security Council has adopted in April 2023 a communique that sets forward not only an ambitious, but I think a comprehensive perspective of the African Union and its member states from the perspective of international peace and security related to cyber security, to the context of peace and security, and the from a perspective of information and communication technology. And I would like to highlight that particular communique that was adopted on April 13th of this year, which did refer to some attacks actually that were carried on, but also presented a larger view that tackles issues like internet governance, like issues mainstreaming cybersecurity in the all AU activities related to peace and security, including the working on the establishment of a unit within the political affairs and security department in this regard, that also encouraged and highlighted the role of robust regulatory frameworks, including the establishment of credible data governance infrastructure and national cybersecurity capacities, upgrading them together with the private sector. That also spoke, and I think rightly so, and referred to it more than once, to capacity building programs that are undertaken with international partners of the African Union. That would include an aspect related to civic education and public awareness. That would include an aspect related to encouraging African civil society organizations, educational institutions, and think tanks to contribute to this process of capacity building and upgrade. It also enlarged more or less the responsibility of dealing with this issue to include the AU system in general, because as you see, there is the AU Commission and there is the AU system, which then includes the regional level and sub-regional level through what we call the regional economic communities and regional mechanisms. It also launched more or less a process of regional forums that would address cybersecurity issues, and it also pulled on the resources of existing capacities such as Afripol, for example, in Algeria. So I think this is it's not the only communique that the Peace and Security Council of the African Union issue, but it is a landmark, and it's most recent. It's in April 2023. So I invite and encourage the participants today and those interested in this topic to consult it and to see where each organization can actually use it to contribute to this African Union agenda that establishes the ownership, but also highlights the importance that it's taking. The second initiative that I would like to refer to, again related to the continental efforts in this regard, is a press release that was issued yesterday, right, 4th of July, about, and I will only read the heading of that press release, and it says a lot. And the heading of that press release says the African Union takes significant steps towards establishing a common African position on the application of international law in cyberspace. So you can see how ambitious this is, but also how timely it is, together with the processes that are taking place within the United Nations, either the open-ended working group or also the whole discussion that is taking place on responsible use and behavior within cyberspace within the UN. And then we can immediately see how that forward-looking and ambitious stand of the African Union to develop a common position on the application of international law in cyberspace. And this was just issued yesterday, so it's pretty fresh from the oven, as we can say. So the discussion that is taking place today within Diplo is not a theoretical one. It's a discussion that clearly relates to how the EU is taking this issue seriously and embarking on a process whereby it has its own vision, perspective, opinion to be shared within a global context. And I hence trust that my colleagues who were more directly integrated into this process, either through the PAPS, the Political Affairs and Peace and Security, or IED, the Information Infrastructure and Information Society Department. I can assure you that such activities that you undertake and others are most relevant both from a theoretical, analytical perspective, but also from a practical one. And the more we can reinforce this African ownership and agency in this regard by contributing the intellectual and the academic and the practical perspective, the more relevant it will be to the current efforts in this regard. So again, in a personal capacity, I thought to share this with you since we received the kind invitation from my colleague Vlada Radunovic and Mwende, and of course our able moderator Kate Gitao. But I encourage you to reach out and to establish that link with the concerned departments, again, PAPS on one side and IED on the other side. I was happy to share just with you these quick comments. And my warm regards from Lomé, Togo, where I'm actually here, and I took the opportunity to, for this lunch hour at our time, to be happy to participate in your webinar. Thank you, moderator. Over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so encouraging to hear a voice from Togo. And thank you for sharing about the communique and the press release, which shows that the African voices are already sounding. Now, without much further ado, we will start our panel discussion on this important topic. As I mentioned, we are privileged to have Engineer John Tanui, who has been very active. He's one of those, together with Ambassador Bitange Ndemo, who set Kenya off on the path of being the Silicon Savannah. And as you hear, we have been recognized by the World Economic Forum, and the efforts of these two gentlemen has been exemplary in pushing Kenya towards this goal. We have with us my fellow young digital diplomats, Yvonne Kivuti, who is on the front line of digital diplomacy in practice day by day. So welcome to our panelists. And we also have Vlada Radunovic from the DiploFoundation, who is really the technical lead in that organization. And these distinguished panelists are going to tell us more about this important topic. So I pray that our 112 participants are going to enjoy this discussion. So I'll start with you, Engineer Tanui, as you greet us and bring us the greetings of the government of Kenya. Just tell us a little bit about what you see as Africa's role in the emerging global environment, and especially what issues should African digital diplomats prioritize? Engineer Tanui.
Thank you very much, our most able moderator, Dr. Catherine Gitau, Your Excellencies, the ambassadors, Swiss ambassador here in Kenya, the AU ambassador, my colleagues and friends, and all the participants, good afternoon from Nairobi. We are quite excited to be in this conversation, representing the Kenyan government. and also listening to earlier remarks by you, Your Excellency, and quoting the global statement that has been made in regards to Kenya's progress. Is true indeed. The Kenyan government has made some remarkable steps towards taking advantage of the digital space, because this is the reality. And I think it's a global reality that the rise and growth of digital space, the cyberspace, is something that cannot be taken for granted. In fact, it's every government all over the world are looking at how to define this space, how to secure it, how to take advantage of it. And Kenya has been in the forefront of this. We've come up with documents to guide us. We came up with a digital blueprint, which was launched sometimes in Kigali, Rwanda, by our former president. We recently developed another document we call the Digital Master Plan for Kenya 2022 to 2032. We also have development programs by the Kenya government, the bottom-up economic transformation model, which prioritizes 5 key pillars for economic transformation. One of the pillars, which is the 5th pillar in that agenda, is digital superhighway, and also the creative economy, which indeed reflects the rising influence of the digital space. It's good to see organization. I want to appreciate Swiss ambassador for the conversation we held here last time when they visited with your also technology ambassador. And it was a very enriching conversation, and we are see the progress that we are soon going to have an MOU that will help us to have this conversation move forward. The other important thing is to see what the DiploFoundation.
Oops. Have we lost Engineer Tanui? No.
We seem to have lost him.
We have lost him.
Okay, so as we wait for the technical problem to be dealt with, I will just call on Ambassador Bitangi Ndemo, who is the Kenyan ambassador to Belgium and to the European Union, to start introducing to us his observations. I've noticed that the EU region, in particular, the one where you are based, is quite aggressive in studying, designing policy and regulating the emerging technologies such as AI and on all digital issues. What can African countries learn from the EU?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. I actually did an article for last Thursday about EU's proactiveness with respect to regulatory mechanisms. You recall they were ahead with respect to GDPR, and many other countries were to study how they did it. But I want to begin by saying that my boss, who is the PS for Foreign Affairs, in April sent me to US, where we had what we referred to as tech ambassadors, and only to discover that several countries have already appointed ambassadors whom they call tech ambassadors. Most of them are based in Silicon Valley. This was organized by the government of Denmark, and we agreed that we would continue with this. There were about 20 countries that were represented in that. But besides that, I've been in several discussions in a field that I've been more interested in, which is the future of learning. And we had a conference in Switzerland. It is something called Global Learning Council. And in it, we spelled out that now we need governments to be more involved so that we don't begin to make policies or regulatory mechanisms that can hinder the innovations that would come, especially from AI. AI, as you probably have known, is causing disruptions and is going to cause more problems, but we don't need to begin to stifle innovation. Even with the EU new legislation or new law on AI, it gives room for innovation. But we need more discourse around this. I say this because I'm involved with, I was involved with OECD. We came up with the principles of AI. I'm involved with the MIT AI discussions in the US. And this is the area we are debating, regulate or not regulate, or but we are getting into a common understanding in various of those discussions that we should focus more on creating sandboxes. And if you recall, when I was chairing the Kenyan AI blockchain committee, our recommendations were that we provide space where government can understand what is happening. At the same time, we proceed with the new solutions that would come out of there. But we are not, the landscape across the world, no one understands the direction that is going. And so we are getting misinformation. We are getting people who are using AI for criminal activity, meaning that we need to hurry up and create a space where we can have diplomats involved if such were to happen. And of course, I think it's happening because many of these platforms have been misused for disinformation. And if it is one country against the other, we can have space to discuss this. And of course, it has been beneficial to us, especially those who are out of the country, with respect to sending back information, what you call digital diplomacy, which facilitates instant communication, enabling us to respond very quickly to international events and emergencies. So it is a sword, and for sure it requires the involvement of diplomats in taking this forward in a much safer way and in ways that we can find mechanisms for solving disputes, because diplomats can escalate it into the UN and be able to solve some of this. So generally what I'm saying is that we need to work together, create a space where we can be able to moderate the emerging tech to enable us create more innovations while at the same time regulating these technologies. I could say more later, but that is what I can say for now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ndemo. Your remarks are very encouraging, and we welcome your participation in these emerging technology policy discussions. Mwende, could you kindly monitor whether the PS has been able to log back on, because I don't think he had finished his comments. And for all the participants, please continue sharing in the chat. Kenyans know where I come from, so saying sharing in the chat is very difficult for me, but I'm trying. So we have a career diplomat who has become a digital diplomat in her career and has an interesting story to tell. So Yvonne, in your role as a digital technology diplomat working in a multilateral station, tell us a little bit about what you do and how you're helping to sound the voice of Africa through your role. Yvonne?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I thank you, Dr. Gitao, for me to be part of this distinguished panel. It's an honor and a privilege. And I wish to acknowledge the presence of Engineer John Nui, PS of IC Digital Economy, Ambassador Professor Bihangendemo, Ambassador to Belgium and the EU, as well as His Excellency Valentin Zellweger, Swiss Ambassador to Kenya, Professor Ivan Vladimir Radunek from DiploFoundation. And thank you so much for your insightful interventions and so far. I think I would say I represent an up and coming or a growing army of African digital diplomats that are now taking center stage, given the continuing increasingly important role digital technologies continue to play within the global economy as well as our societies as well. I do need to refer to the pandemic and how it highlighted just how important digital solutions are in our day-to-day lives. In parallel as well, and as the international and security context is even more complex, digital technologies, of course, are becoming increasingly a driver of geopolitical competition and a barometer of global influence. And as we see it as well play out, even we continue to see the element of cyber war play out in the Russian-Ukraine context as well. And I think for me as a diplomat coming to take on issues to do with digital and tech diplomacy is to go back to the Secretary General, United Nations SG's Antonio Guterres noted be two seismic shifts that will shape our this 21st century. And the first is the climate crisis, and the second is digital transformation. And just as international cooperation is crucial to preserving the health of the planet, it's also need to reap benefits as well as mitigate the risks that come with digital technologies. And what this has happened is that it has entailed the introduction of new issues on diplomatic agendas. Aside from the operational aspects of digital technologies being used to aid the work of diplomats, is also issues that we see increasingly now as on our political agendas. And so it is imperative in order to navigate this new world that's shaped with digital technologies that must equip themselves, of course, with the technological skills, critical thinking, as well as ability to question what has been offered and to discern conflicting information and policy, as well as practices. These skills remain essential. Of course, will inform how strong or the today's thematic action on how to strengthen or why are African voices lacking in the global arena when it comes to digital discourse. And so therefore I would say capacity building has been an essential tool that has been meaningful in order to create critical engagement on issues, of course, in complementarity with relevant
Yvonne,
technical ministries. Yes.
Yes, you're breaking. So there's a request that you close your video so that you can, we see if you can be heard more clearly then. As you finish your remarks. Yeah,
sure.
we want hearing. Yes, just go on.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So I was saying capacity building and development is essential, and it has enabled meaningful and critical engagement on these issues. Complementarity, of course, with the relevant technical ministries, departments, and agencies as well within the Kenyan context. And so we continue to strengthen that interface with the relevant ministries in order to bridge that technical and diplomatic world in addressing the opportunity and the challenges that are presented through what is the fourth industrial revolution. And perhaps I could give an example, and the most, I think, notable digital discourse right now is around the GDC, and we see that Kenya has ensured that we play a central role in this process and identified it and incorporated that process as part of our key agenda as we are the coordinators of the African Group on ITU issues and digital matters in Geneva. And therefore, just to a brief maybe background, if time allows, is just the GDC is primarily taking place in New York, and therefore we understood the importance of ensuring that the Geneva chapter is able to plug in and lend herself and augment that process taking place in New York. The GDC is expected to outline shared principles for an open, free, and secure digital for all. And it is expected to also address issues to do with digital connectivity, internet fragmentation, application of human rights. And so it's important that Africa definitely has a stronger voice and ensures that the priorities are reflected in the outcome of this process. So perhaps I could also maybe just make reference to one of the ways that we have been augmenting the value addition that the mission has also been giving to the process of digital diplomacy is reaching out to other regional groupings and other countries that we feel have similar contexts as ours and similar challenges, like-minded countries. Of note also, we have an AU-EU Ambassadors Dialogue that has identified digital cooperation as one of the key areas of cooperation. And this platform is in line with the AU 2063 agenda in accelerating, of course, innovation and technology, but as well as the Africa-Europe Digital Economic Partnership, which calls for digital economy partnership on equal footing and based on common principles. So this has been very instrumental in just even building common understanding, which in itself is a win. I think perhaps maybe I can stop now. I'll answer any other questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, for giving us a practical view of how digital diplomacy is working and how Africans are beginning to coalesce around this issue. We have Vlada from the DiploFoundation, and they have been involved in digital diplomacy capacity building for a quarter of a century. So give us an insight, Vlada, into how Africa is increasingly becoming a priority for Diplo's activities and what you plan to do.
Thank you, Kate. When you mentioned this quarter of a century, I really feel old, though I prefer to be understood as experienced. First of all, big kudos to Diplo's Africa team. I think it is important to mention for putting us together and organizing this discussion. I think it's really timely and relevant. It builds on this 25 years of Diplo's experience in capacity building, working in Africa with African friends and partners on digital and diplomacy and policy and so on, an alumni of thousands of people. I'm really glad to see some of you here, some of you dating back from 2005, you're experienced as well. And basically the problems that we faced during this call on connectivity shows us the specific position that Africa is, and the need for sort of a pan-African position on digital policy, digital diplomacy aspects. Access is not the only one. Access can be broken down to many bits and pieces of components. Engineer Tanui mentioned the digital superhighway, but that's not just a cable. That's basically servers, IP protocols, satellites these days as well. So it is a much more complex structure that the Africa has to work on, and there is certainly always a number of other issues. So if we look at the digital and digital diplomacy, we usually in Diplo like to distinguish a couple of aspects. One is digital as a topic. That's what we mentioned, starting from access and economy and education and innovation to cybersecurity, to cybercrime, very pertinent problems in Africa where you can feel them, they're tangible. They even started impacting the results of the elections in a way, not directly, but indirectly, regarding the access to finances, the access to internet, shutdowns of Facebook and other cybercrime and so on. So that's digital as a topic. Then you have digital as a tool, which is a very interesting thing. I mean, we've been using it in the last 25 years as, for education and research and so on, not only e-learning, but now more and more AI and virtual reality and other things, which are not easy to put all around the world. And then a very important part is digital as a change of environment for diplomacy, which we tend to forget sometimes. And that's basically when you look at how diplomacy works today, it's not only the traditional diplomats. There is a bunch of other stakeholders and actors which have a huge say. And if you look at the big tech, the companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they have bigger annual turnover than most of the African countries. Most of the African countries' GDPs, they have a huge impact. So if you even go to not just the Internet Governance Forum, but you go to the first committee of the UN that some colleagues know, or go to Geneva, you'll see that this kitchen of where we prepare digital policies on a global level is full of other stakeholders, which, and I'll get back to that in a second, can be a great advantage for Africa as well. Now, there is a number of challenges. We always start with complaints with what doesn't work, what doesn't help us. Complexity of topics, I just scratched the surface of that. And we've heard a number of terms, which Ambassador Zellweger started with a tech envoy. Ambassador Hammer mentioned the open-ended working group. Engineer Tenui mentioned the digital superhighway, digital self-determination. So they're all the very complex and loaded terms which we need to unpack. That complexity is not easy to digest for governments today, not also for the other stakeholders. And that's one of the roles where we see as Diplo ourselves to help with. The other one is the complexity of the social impact of the technology. When we talk about AI today, it's the least about technology. It's mostly about us and humans. The regulatory aspect, there was a discussion on the impact on innovation as well, which I think Ambassador Demo mentioned. And then you have multiple forums. GDC, Open-Ended Working Group, IGF, WTO, you can name these acronyms. Acronyms are all around. We're trying to update the acronym set that we provide from Diplo's side to help. And then limited resources, as I think Yvonne mentioned, of diplomats in many missions of Africa around the world. Now, there are opportunities as well. I want to turn it to the positive side. Firstly, we notice, and particularly in the recent 5-10 years, working across Africa and with the partners in Africa, there is an interest and there is a motivation, because digital challenges target specific challenges of African functionality. And there is an interest to somehow address it. That's a good thing, because we have a base why we engage more. And we see more and more interest also of diplomats across Africa. The second one is Africa has a very strong, huge non-state community. If you go to ICANN, IGF, all other fora, you'll see a lot of civil society, business representatives, technical community people, which are amazing. Many of them are currently in this room, but their potential as diplomats for Africa is underused. So that's always a suggestion to diplomats from Africa and other developing countries: map and connect with those citizens, those Africans that are there, very visible, very recognized, and work with them. That's a strong advantage. There is as an opportunity, there is a specific need to address certain things. Africa is not interested in AI, for instance, because we can do something, but we don't know what with AI. For innovation, for the sake of innovation. Africa has very particular challenges that it wants to address with digital technology, AI, and so on. That can put a particular balance in sometimes a little bit of a power struggle on the global level. So Africa has that potential. Finally, there are new tools. AI, it's just one of them, which is going to shape or change the function of diplomats and actually help them. And I know Kate had quite some experiences with a group of governmental experts and big delegations of developed countries where developing countries cannot afford that. With fine-tuned an investment in AI, smart investment in AI solutions and future ones, the role of the diplomat will be helped, not replaced, but helped, particularly in developing countries. And they can catch up on that. We'll be happy to share some of the tools that we developed in AI and help with that. And finally, the learning opportunities, they're numerous. And Diplo is just one setup. We did recently the training in New York for diplomats for Global Digital Compact. It was an amazing discussion, a number of African diplomats over there as well. And there is a question how well diplomats in Geneva, in New York, even within the same country, and let alone across the countries and across these Brussels, Addis Ababa, how well they're connected when it comes to digital. And I know there is an initiative in Geneva to connect better diplomats that work tech people of diplomats of African countries. So I encourage you to do that. We'll certainly help. Mwenda shared a number of online courses. We did the training programs for ambassadors, diplomats in Namibia, Rwanda, a number of other countries. We are preparing some more for Africa. So let's continue this discussion. I hope this is just the first of the initial scratching the fields. Back to you, Kate.
Okay, thank you. I believe you brought out very important issues. I can see I have just 1 minute in terms of time. And therefore, I don't think we're going to be able to have the Q&A with our audience that we were longing to have. So I hope that you don't feel cheated. I think this is the first of many webinars with the vibrant interest that we've seen. I'd like to thank Engineer Tanui, Ambassador Ndemo, Yvonne Kivuti, Vlada, Ambassador Valentin, Ambassador Al-Joaili, and Nena and everyone else who has been here. I think some have left because they have tight digital schedules. But thank you so much for coming. I hope you haven't been disappointed. I hope you're going to join us next time. And I think next time we should schedule 1.5 hours so that we have enough time for Q&A. I believe all the questions and comments you put in the chat have been captured and will be moderated and responded to on the Diplo website with the help of Mwende. I'd like to thank Mwende and Judy and the technical team from Diplo, Katarina, everybody who has helped. May God bless you and have a wonderful time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for this, Dr. Thank you.